In this video, we're going to take a look at what it takes to change from one caliber to another and examine the reloading process when loading .45 ACP ammunition with the Hornady Lock and Load AP Progressive Reloading Press. This press was set up to load .44 Magnum ammunition, and I've already taken the liberty of changing over the case feeder to load .45 ACP ammo, the details of which will be covered in separate videos. So let's take a look at what it takes to change over from pistol calibers with the same primer size. The first thing that we're going to do is going to be to change out the shell plate. We've got a number 30 shell plate installed currently, and we're going to switch that out for a number 1 shell plate. I'm going to start by taking a 9/16 wrench, securing the shell plate, and then by loosening that 9/16 inch center bolt. I'm just going to back this bolt completely out, set that aside, and then lift off the shell plate. Finally, I'm going to take the case retention spring and remove that. Next, I'm going to take a number 1 shell plate and I'm going to install this shell plate on the press. By rotating the shell plate until it lines up with the keyway, and then you're going to take the center bolt and then install that until it is hand tight, and then give it a gentle snugging with the 9/16 inch wrench. You don't need to tighten it very much. Finally, I'm going to take the case retention spring, put it around the back side, lift the ram slightly until the case slider gets out of the way, and then proceed to raise the ram completely while pushing down on the case retention spring. This will allow the case retention spring to go into the recessed groove so that case feeding will be smooth and reliable. Next, we'll remove the dies we were using last time. In this case, it's .44 Magnum. So starting with the sizer deprimer, moving on to the expander, take off the powder measure, and finally the bullet seating die. For this particular video, we're going to use the following dies for loading .45 ACP. We're going to start out with the sizing and depriming die. We're going to use a bullet seating die to seat only. We're going to use the powder cop die to keep track of our powder charge and make sure we're not either producing a squib load or over double charging. And then we're also going to use the taper crimp die. So let's go ahead and install the .45 caliber dies and the powder measure. Starting in station number 1, we're going to install the sizer deprimer. In station number 2, we're going to install the powder measure with the PTX expander installed for 451/452 diameter. This will be ideal for our .45 ACP rounds that we're going to be loading. After the powder measure, we want to validate our charge, so we're going to drop in the powder cop die. Following that, we will install the bullet seating die. This is set up to seat only. We're not going to crimp in this particular step. And then in the 5th station, we're going to install the Hornady .45 caliber taper crimp die. So in this particular case, we're using all 5 stations to the maximum possible extent. We've got sizing and depriming, followed by powder charging and expanding, followed by powder validation, followed by bullet seating, and finally crimping. Having the bullet seating die separate from the crimping operation will allow us to make minute cartridge overall length adjustments independent of the crimp setting, which can pretty much stay constant given a known length of brass. So with this setup, we're really set up to load large quantities of .45 ACP ammunition. We're going to be validating our charge, and we're going to have fine-tuning capabilities that are really optimal based on workflow. The next thing that I'm going to do is going to be to fill the powder measure. So what I'm going to do is, for this particular load, I'm going to use Winchester W231, which is a ball powder that meters very nicely in this particular powder measure. So I'm just going to pour with one hand and keep the powder going into the powder measure with my other hand, with my finger and thumb here. This will allow us to quickly and effectively fill up the powder measure with no spillage. And when we're about 3/4 full or so, we'll put the cap back on our powder canister, and we're going to keep the top of the powder measure open so that we can validate our charge and dump the powder back into the measure after each validation. In order to validate this powder charge, what we're going to do is going to be to take a spent casing that's already been cleaned, and we'll use this to zero out our scale and to dispense powder loads into, and we'll dial it right into our desired powder charge. For this particular powder validation, we're going to use the Hornady GS350 electronic powder scale. So we're just going to set the spent shell casing on here. We're going to turn the scale on, and this will cause it to zero out based on the particular weight of this exact case. Next, we need to dispense a powder load. What we're going to do is just pop the case into station number 2 and then raise the ram. This will cause a load of powder to be dispensed into the case. Then we're going to take that case with the powder load and set it onto the GS350 electronic scale. 4.6 grains. What we want is a load of 5.7 grains. In this particular case, I'm using a powder measure equipped with the pistol rotor and micrometer metering insert. So what I'm going to do is just back that off a little bit. So now I'm going to dispense another load of powder into that shell casing. Setting it back on the scale, we see that we're up to 4.9 grains now. And after a few more passes, we've dialed in our powder charge. The next thing I'm going to do is going to be to load up some primers. I'm using Winchester WLPs here in a flip tray. What I'm going to do is just hold the tray upside down and open the tray slowly such that the primers fall into the flip tray, trying to keep it centered as I open the carton. We've now emptied our primers. We can then proceed to shake the primer tray until all the primers have righted themselves. Now that we have all of the primers facing the proper orientation, what I'm going to do is use this flip tray and a stainless steel tray that I've got. I'm going to hold the flip tray tightly to the bottom, flip the whole unit, and then we have our primers oriented facing the proper direction for use with the pickup tubes. Next, we're going to take an empty large pickup tube and we're going to just pick up the individual primers so that we can then invert the primer pickup tube and fill up the primer feed tube on the Hornady Lock and Load AP Progressive Press. Here we're going to load 100 primers at a time. Sounds kind of like a lot, but it actually goes pretty fast. And we'll just pick up the last 6 here. Now we're ready to flip the primer tube and install the primers in the press. So now I'm going to take the primer pickup tube with the hitch pin facing down, place the primer tube on the plastic guide, and then pull the hitch pin. If we shake, we're going to hear those primers fall down into the primer tube. Our primers are now loaded and ready to go. We'll just replace that hitch pin, store the pickup tube, and we're ready to go.